Hi guys, thanks for your flexibility. I've decided to try something different and do a screencast of this presentation about the Constitution. As you can tell from this first screen, let me put it into presentation mode. You can tell from this first screen that this particular presentation is going to cover 3.01, 3.02, and 3.03. I felt like since all those power standards are geared towards the Constitution, that it only made sense to turn this into one seminar, which will actually be offered in a couple different parts depending on how far we get into the learning. For sure, with this first part, you will get through the learning of 3.01. And so on this first screen, you can see that that is what the Constitution looked like. You can kind of picture that historical document, the brown, crinkly parchment, handwritten with quill. Pretty cool just to see it in its original format like that. This particular picture I decided to put into the slideshow today because that is what the Constitution looks like on display in current modern times. You can tell that there's always security guards around it. Maybe some of you went on the 8th grade field trip to Washington, D.C. or have been there with family. Where it is located is called the Rotunda of the National Archives. And that's it. Those 4 pieces of paper are the Constitution of our country. So on 4 pieces of paper, I think it's about 4,500 words, our legislative branch, judicial branch, executive branch, the electoral college, everything was set up on our government. So it's pretty amazing the work that our founding fathers put into that document, and now people can stroll past it and see it. To my knowledge, and somebody could always fact check this, that would be pretty cool, I think, the documents have only been taken out of Washington, D.C. once, after we were attacked on December 7th, 1941 at Pearl Harbor. They actually removed the documents and brought them to Fort Knox, which is part of our treasury where we have a lot of our gold supplies. So the vaults and the security system there are pretty, one of a kind. And so during World War II, those documents were actually protected there. The Constitution was protected there and the Declaration of Independence. This particular video does a great job of explaining the Constitution. It's done by John Green, who many of you know as an author. The very cool thing is that he is one of those well-rounded kind of genius at everything he touches, and he is a wonderful political mind, historical mind. This video is great. The first 4 minutes do a wonderful job of explaining the Articles of Confederation. So I think at this point, I'll have who's ever the guest teacher with you today, go ahead and push pause on the video of my recording and pull up this particular video and be able to show you, like I said, about the first 4 minutes. The rest of it will always be in Empower in the seminar area, and you can certainly watch the rest of it. Know that John Green speaks really quickly, sarcastically, full of a lot of wit and kind of inside jokes. So it's a pretty enjoyable thing to watch, and I think it'll be a good review about the Articles of Confederation. The whole point of Learning Target 3.01, I should say hopefully you enjoyed that John Green video, and it did a nice job of reviewing the failures of the Articles of Confederation and why the Constitution became such an important document. The second draft of our government is certainly the draft that stuck, so to speak. So as I was saying, with Learning Target 3.01, it's all about the anatomy of the Constitution. So I tried to give a visual there. When we're thinking about anatomy, like with the human anatomy, we're thinking about all the different pieces and how they work together so that our body functions properly. When you're thinking about the anatomy of the Constitution, it's the same idea, the same thought, that it's all about the different parts and the different pieces of the Constitution and how they work together to form our current government and hopefully an effective government. And so when you look at 3.01, the parts of the Constitution, you can tell that that analogy fits in perfectly with the Meets level, where it states, I can explain how the parts of the Constitution combine to form our current government. We, for now, are going to skip the preamble part. We'll definitely come back to it because it's a very important piece of the Constitution. For now, I want to jump to this jigsaw activity. You're going to be randomly counted off into groups so that each group has about 5 people. If you end up with 4 or with 6 in your group, you'll just have to modify and adjust and make it work. But your job will be, once you're with your group, first of all, introduce yourselves in case there's somebody in the group who you don't already know. And then as a group, decide who's going to take each of these jobs. Once that decision has been made, each person is going to read their section. Each is only about 2 or 3 paragraphs long. And then, here's the important piece, and then is going to summarize this information for their group. So not just reading quotes from the book, not just copying stuff from the book word for word and telling that to their group, but really summarizing it, putting it into kid-friendly language, breaking it down so people understand what the legislative branch does, for example, or what the federal system means. There are a couple different ways you can take care of the notes for this activity. You could either have one document that somebody creates in your group and share it out with everybody so everybody can be editing it at the same time and talking about it and making sure everybody understands as a group, because this is definitely a collaborative group effort where all 5 of you should understand all these different bulleted items. Or if you want each person just to set up their own document, be in charge of their own document, that's fine. If you are I want to write this down on notebook paper, of course, that's a completely legitimate way of keeping track of information as well. Whatever you choose, the title for this should be Parts of the Constitution 3.01, and that'll help you keep organized. At this point, again, I'll just have whoever the guest teacher is push pause for a little bit. This will probably take, about 15 to 20 minutes to get into groups, for everyone to decide what job they're going to do, to quietly read it, and then to explain it to your group. Depending on how far you got, you maybe got to the point where you're ready to go over your notes and make sure that you have accurate notes. So again, kind of just double checking, just like you would do in a math class if you did some practice problems, and then you want to double check and make sure you did them right. So for limited government, the important thing to know about limited government is that our legislators, our president, our Supreme Court, everybody in our country has to follow the Constitution. There's no one who's above the law. And so that's what limited government means. They have limited power because we all have to follow the Constitution. If you think about a dictatorship or a monarchy, those leaders don't have to follow the Constitution. They feel like they are above the law. They have an amount of power that puts them above everything else. So that's one of the cool things about our republic, about our democracy, is that we are all, each and every one of us, under the rule and under the law of the Constitution. Majority rule with minority rights. That's one where, conveniently enough, the title kind of says what it is. We're very used to majority rule. I think, voting, and even if you're voting at school for something, a popcorn party versus a pizza party, we're used to majority rule. The important piece in our country is that even though we recognize minority rule, we still recognize that minority groups still have rights. This is why in the news right now with current events, you hear so much about it, because there are some groups that are frightened that with the change to a new presidency, that minority rights may be ignored. If you think about women or Mexican Americans or gay men and women, they're kind of concerned about this piece. But the important part to remember, and I've heard a few newscasts talk about this, is that it is a fundamental principle, a fundamental idea of our Constitution that you can have majority rule, but that you still have to honor the minority rights of people. That's a value that our country is based on. Federalism is in direct response to the Articles of Confederation. Remember, the Articles of Confederation did everything at the state level. They treated each of those states, as you know, almost as an independent country. Well, when the framers of the Constitution, the writers of the Constitution got together, they realized there needed to be a split focus, that there needed to be a national government who would work on things, like national defense and trade, and that there's also state level control. For example, education is based on a state-by-state basis. How elections are run is done on a state-by-state basis. So there are lots of individual things that states get to figure out for themselves. Separation of powers is why we have the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. Each of those obviously has a special, unique, individual, distinct job to do. The visual that just popped up there is one to help you look at federalism, that you have national government on one side of the balance and states on the other side of the balance. The three branches, as mentioned, are the reason, that we have separation of powers is to have these three branches. The legislative branch is the one that comes up first in the Constitution because the framers of the Constitution thought it was the most important. And you can tell that they gave them the most important jobs. If you're telling a group that they get to make the laws and control the money, because money is power, that's huge. So the Senate and the House are the ones who get to set tax rates, set the national budget. There's a lot of power in that group of 538 men and women making those decisions. In Congress, like I've been mentioning, we have two different branches. We have the House of Representatives and the Senate. That was, again, a compromise made between states. Small states love that we have an automatic 2 senators from each state because a state with a small population like North Dakota gets 2 senators, and a huge state like California also gets 2 senators. Well, to make the Californias of the country happy, so to speak, that's why you have the House of Representatives, because that way California can have 53 representatives, whereas someplace like North or South Dakota only get 1. Minnesota has 8. So that's an important piece to recognize, is just the balance. Again, balance is a key word of all this, of having a House and a Senate. The executive branch comes up in Article 2, so there's a little bit less written about the executive branch than there's a legislative branch. To me, the most important piece about the executive branch is knowing that it's not just the president, and it's even not just the president and the vice president. Obviously, those 2 men get most of our attention, but there are other departments, 15 different departments, tons of agencies, divisions, all these different groups. There's hundreds, thousands of people that are technically part of the executive branch. The president gets to appoint these people, especially those that are in the executive departments. Like recently, you've heard that President-elect Trump has been nominating people to be like his Secretary of Education, Secretary of Defense. Some of those jobs, those men and women will all be part of the executive branch starting in January. The judicial branch is the branch that has the smallest amount written about it. The judicial branch is the Supreme Court as well as other federal courts. So in St. Paul, there's a federal court. Other places around the country have federal courts. Obviously, the Supreme Court can't listen to every court case where somebody is breaking the Constitution. So there are these other federal courts to help with that. And when things can't get decided at a federal court level, that's when it goes to the Supreme Court. And their job is, like it says, to interpret the meanings of laws and really to interpret the meaning of the Constitution, something that was written back in the 1780s, interpreting it for, 2016. And then also setting punishments for people who break those laws. And that'll be good for 3.01.